necessarily theologically astute, said, Jesus was not God, rector certus. Well, in some sense, I think I would say that, but I would qualify it. Jesus certainly does not pray to himself when he's praying. Jesus dies, and you can hardly say God can die. So there's a sense in which you never say Jesus is God as a simplistic. But that's not what people heard. People heard the charge that he was a priest at that point, saying that there is nothing to the divine nature of the Christ. And so it started an enormous debate in the Richmond press. And we fed it every week because the dialogue went on for 6 weeks. And so there was a real consternation. And then the national church got in it because a man named Carol Simcox edited a thing called the what was it called? The Living Church, that's right. And so he got into this, and he started a great big debate about that. So it was all being debated. And within a year, I was elected Bishop of Newark. And so there was this great consternation led by Carol Simcox that somebody that denies the divinity of Christ should not be a bishop. So they campaigned for not to be elected or not to be confirmed, which spiked the sales of this Hebrew Lord dramatic. The book went right up.
That was a good plan.
It was a good plan. And I probably entered the House of Bishops, the best known new bishop that we'd had in a long time, because every diocese had to decide. And I think I had 10 dioceses that voted against my being a bishop. And you can almost imagine who they were. They were San Joaquin and Fort Worth and Dallas and Lexington, Kentucky, and Peoria, Illinois, that sort of. But the pockets that still are some.
Let me ask you something. You've had a ministry which has challenged people's thinking and challenged the established church, and many times you found yourself on the outside of that church or pushed to the outside of the church. Personally, what has that been like for you? The cost of your discipleship?
I think the cost of being dishonest would have been far more heavy. So I don't know that I know how to quantify that. I have a certain triumphalism about me, Chris. It's kind of interesting. Because when I look back at the church, every battle I fought, I've won. The church is in a very different place. When I had to fight, I grew up in a segregated church. We had a bishop in North Carolina named Henry B. Delaney who he was called the Suffragan Bishop of Colored Work, and he was never allowed to go inside a white church in North Carolina in the 30s. We had segregated camps. Camp Delaney for the black children, Camp Veda Mecum for the white children. So it was a segregated system. Well, you reach a point where that's intolerable. The Bishop of North Carolina today is Michael Curry, who's an African American. That's an enormous victory in one lifetime. When I grew up, women not only couldn't be acolytes and couldn't be lay readers, they couldn't serve on the vestry, they couldn't go to general convention. Nobody even thought about them being priests. I wound up at the end of my career, we got 15 women priests, 40% of my clergy in Newark were priests, were women. 65% of my seminary students were women. Now that battle's over, except in pockets like Fort Worth and Peoria. But it's over. And the church is not even debating that anymore. I got involved in a Jewish-Christian dialogue. When I was a kid, I was told that it was okay to hate Jews because they were Christ killers and all that stuff. I never saw a good Jew in my Sunday school material. They were all named Judas Iscariot, not Simon, but Annas and Caiaphas, Pharisees. They were all bad people. And nobody ever told me Jesus was a Jew. When I saw a picture of Jesus, he looked like a Swede. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin. I didn't think he was Jewish.
My grandmother thought he was French because she heard the gospel in French. So.
Yeah, well, all these, the stories I would read was the Jews kept giving Jesus a hard time. The Jews kept giving Paul a hard time. Nobody told me Jesus and Paul were both Jews. And so I've had the privilege of dealing with this rabbi in Richmond. I've had the privilege of doing dialogue with Hindu scholars in India, and I've had the privilege of doing dialogue with Buddhist scholars in China. And so I've moved beyond all the boundaries, but that's where the church is today. The church doesn't have a missionary in the old sense of going out to convert the heathen.
You found joy, satisfaction, fulfillment in your ministry and in some of these struggles, because they weren't without some pain and some cost.
When I ordained the first openly gay man, December the 16th, 1989. The fact that I can remember the date indicates that it was the cosmic event. I went through a year where my mail was so awful. The death threats were My house was under police guard. Hardly a day went by that we didn't have abusive telephone calls and abusive mail.
Right.
And that went on for a year. And my church responded to that by passing a resolution disassociating themselves from my action. But the fascinating thing, I regard that's the best victory I ever had. Because when the vote was taken in the House of Bishops to disassociate with me, because I had ordained this man, the vote was 78-74, and 2 abstentions. And I was one of the 2 abstentions because I didn't know how to vote on whether I wanted to associate with me or not. And the other one was the retired Bishop of Delaware, who agreed with me completely, but he thought bishops shouldn't vote, a point of view that I happen to agree with. So the vote was really 78-76, which meant only 1 vote would have kept it from being. But then it was such a positive vote. Nobody expected it to be that close.
You know, you've taken us so far,
Yep.
too. You know, I'm
Well,
an openly gay Episcopal priest in diocese with my partner Karen, and it's not a problem. When I walk into the church, the bishop knows, my parish knows. The thing now that we're having a problem with is, will they bless our unions? Not will they ordain us.
Well, the answer to that is yes. They will bless your unions, and you will also be married. That's just a matter of time.
I think it is.
The fact that George Bush, our president, wants to constitutionalize a prohibition means that it's already past the point where you can do that. That's like standing in front of the tide trying to keep it from coming in. That's what that is the Willie Horton issue for this year's campaign. That's going to exercise some of the votes on his right-wing frontier, but it will not pass. Now, there'll never be a constitutional amendment, and what we'll do in the nation is what we've done as a church. We'll sort of back into the future, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here. But the fact that we have Gene Robinson as a bishop of our church in New Hampshire today means that we will never again be able to say there's any position in this church that is outside the boundaries of a qualified gay or lesbian person. That's what he says, and that's why people are so upset about it. But they're not very upset when you think about it. You know, that was a year ago, and he was elected, I think, in June or July and confirmed in July, August, I've forgotten when. But it's been about a year. And there was all this great threat and consternation. They're going to split the church, this, that, and that. Where is that today? Well, the 2 things, the movement, what's it called, the Anglican Council or something like that, who pays any attention to them anymore? You know, my rule of thumb is that any national organization that has its founding meeting in Plano, Texas can't be very significant. You don't go to Plano, Texas to form a great movement. And I don't see any energy around that stuff anymore. And the people that are in it are the same people that were opposed to women bishops, were opposed to women priests, that were frankly opposed to immigration, if you go back far enough. It was South Carolina and Texas, and you name them, they're the same thing.
It's the same place.
So, you know, I just feel like what keeps the church together is 2 things. The church pension fund and Whipples. Those are the 2 things. Whipples is the church investment house.
Investment house, right.
And if these people left the church, they wouldn't have anybody to complain against. And their whole personality is that they're always the abused people that headquarters is trying to get. So they fight headquarters. If they became headquarters by withdrawing and forming their own church, they would cannibalize each other. They would eat each other up. So why you pay any attention to that? What worries me is not that. What worries me are those Anglicans from the Archbishop of Canterbury on down who are so concerned about keeping unity that they allow homophobia. That's an awful thing. I said to the Archbishop of Canterbury, if the issue was slavery, would you preserve slavery in order to keep unity? Of course you wouldn't, because your conscience is raised. And, you know, it's a shameful act to preserve unity in order to allow people to continue to be homophobic. You ought to challenge that. They say, but all those African churches need to confront reality. They need to have to deal with gay Christians. They don't think they are gay Christians in Africa. They tell me that homosexuality is an English disease. Only the English have it. I think they learned it from the English missionaries. I think that's where they got the idea. But, you know, the idea that somehow there aren't any gay people in Africa. If you knew that you were going to be killed if you came out of the closet, you'd probably stay in the closet. I have lots of letters from gay Africans who write me. At Lambeth, gay African bishops talk to me, but they wouldn't dare, and I promise I'd never reveal their names. They would